Ayi-yu-kwee, Malita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my review of Girl 11 by Amy Suter Clark. This book is being published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I was able to receive a e-arc from NetGalley, so thank you so much for an honest review. So Girl 11 follows a woman named El Castillo. She used to be a CPS, so a Child Protective Services agent, changed careers to be a true crime podcast investigator. So she, with a focus on missing children. So her whole thing with her podcast is to focus on the victims of cold cases of missing and murdered children, to be able to get them justice, to be focused on the victim as opposed to the perpetrator. Basically, the whole podcast is to be able to bring light to the case, to be able to bring fresh eyes to it and help get justice for the victims. But as a new season approaches, Elle decides to take on her white whale of sorts, which is the Countdown Killer, who was a serial kidnapper and killer in the late 1990s in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, who had kidnapped and killed 3 girls a year from 1996 to 1999. In 1999, the last girl escaped, and for 20 years, he's been unknown. So Elle is focusing her latest season of her podcast on the Countdown Killer. When she gets an email from someone saying that they have a tip of who he might end up being, she goes to meet this person only to find that he was murdered. So, and things ensue, and she believes that the Countdown Killer is back. So with that in mind, there are some content warnings for this book, including missing and murdered children, fertility issues, graphic depictions of death and injury, working with the police, misogyny, domestic violence, mentions of domestic violence here and there. This is a debut novel from Amy Suter Clark, and it was I liked the beginning of it, is what I can say. It very much had, of course, Nightsman vibes, because we do get interchangeable chapters from what's happening now to recordings of Elle's podcast, which I really liked, and I think it would be really great in terms of an audiobook format. And it was quite the diverse cast of characters. Though Elle was white, her husband is Mexican, and I believe her best friend, it was hinted at that she was on the asexuality spectrum, I believe, but it wasn't outright said. And then captain of a precinct who's a complete badass, Ayan, she wears a hijab and is really passionate about her job. That Amy Suter Clark still had a white perspective, but was understanding these other BIPOC perspectives. We also have a person of disability who actually plays a relatively important part, but ultimately reminded me of Oracle from Batman, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or not. And really, it was a fun diverse cast, and we got to know a lot of them. I wanted to know more about them. I wanted to know more about Elle's companionship with them, her connection to them, because throughout the whole book, that was one thing that I found, was that we are very much in Elle's head. Elle has some shadows in her own past that is hinted at but never really said until the very close to the very end, but it was really kind of predictable. But because of that, she feels very closed off to the rest of the characters in this book, which, yes, I get, but at the same time, it doesn't, it makes me think there was never really a connection, and therefore I wasn't necessarily connected to when relationships started falling apart. So I didn't feel like there was any real risk in that, or didn't feel like it was as impactful as it could have been. I've seen reviews that said that with this diverse cast of characters, it felt fairly repetitive and obvious, some of the problems that some of these characters of color faced, to the point of being preachy. I actually thought it was relatively nice. Some of it I thought was really subtle in terms of like not assuming that someone of Mexican descent, or someone who is a Mexican immigrant, doesn't know English. There was like subtle things like that Elle ended up figuring out on her own. However, there was little diverts of things that she was trying to explain, which I tended to appreciate, just because, thank you, it's in there. Not everybody knows. I knew, and it seemed kind of obvious, but it was nice that it was in the book. So like I said, the first half or so of the book was really interesting. It was riveting, and like I said, the cast of characters was really diverse, and it was interesting. It made me had high hopes for this book, actually, and then halfway through it started kind of going downhill, not because of the diverse characters or anything, but because of the writing style. It got really choppy, and I started to actually worry that the book was going to turn for the worst in terms of Elle becoming an unreliable point of view as well, and I had this worry that everything else was going so well, and it was going to become that trope of we don't trust Elle, that the twist is going to be a mental illness, which didn't end up happening, but it was still frustrating to kind of go through that and going, is this really going to go that way? It doesn't, but it was still choppy. It also got to the point where I was having a problem following Elle's line of processing, just because she did sort of you did question her mentality of her decisions making, and the fact that she kept going behind people's backs, and it was really frustrating. It made me not want to root for her. One issue I had at the very pretty close to the beginning of the book was the red herring, because we're introduced to her character and immediately Elle's like, he seems like a tool, and it's repeated a couple times, and it's like, but why? Because she had said that right after she saw a picture of him doing a peace sign and was like, he's a tool. And it's like, so is anyone who does a peace sign in pictures like a tool to you? Or does this particular person seem like a tool? Why? I don't understand. It was kind of frustrating, and I was just like, that was a little too obvious for me. Sometimes it was good in terms of there were certain aspects that creeped me out, and it actually made my heart start racing, and then there was other aspects that just made me question how they got to this decision-making process. I don't know, it was just kind of odd. And it felt, particularly towards the end, that everything was happening either too conveniently, or that it was taking a while for them to figure it out, when I was just like, what? Why is this taking you so long? So there was actually a couple of pages towards the very end that I ended up skim reading, because I'm like, okay, let's wrap this up. Overall, enjoyed the book. Probably 2.53 stars ultimately. I will be keeping an eye on Amy Cedar Clarke. Like I said, this was her debut novel. Just because this one had promise. It just had, I feel like the first half was going great, and then it kind of fumbled at the end. So I will be keeping an eye on this author in the future. Wouldn't pick up a physical copy of this book, and it was a fun little thriller read. But yeah, it felt flat. It fell short for me. So that was my review of Girl 11 by Amy Cedar Clarke. If you have read this book, or if you're interested in it, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments down below. And like I said, this book comes out April 20th of 2021. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and click the little bell icon so you know when I upload more content. Check out my raise awareness links if you haven't already. I have some things that will pertain to the subjects of this book. For instance, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people. Organizations throughout the US and Canada that are working with the families of missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people, and trying to better connect resources in order for there to be more data on this. And I hear that Representative Holland is making this an organization within the Department of the Interior, so hopefully we get better results from that as well. Yeah, otherwise I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I'll see you again next time. Ciao.